Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to discuss defining meaningful metrics. In order to secure strategic funding and justify your preference management initiative, the impact of that preference management collection has to be understood by the organization overall. And in order to do that, it's essential to identify the goals and set measurable targets to maximize your company's return on its investment. Without proper planning in place, your organization will struggle with justifying the expenditure on preference management, and the project may only have marginal progress, and it certainly won't increase your customer experience. There are 5 key and measurable reasons that companies adopt preference management. And these KPIs are the driver for the implementation and continued focus on the collection of preferences, and they help you understand why you're putting preference management in place in the first place. While companies want to focus on covering all of the drivers, there's always one driver that's really important, and that's the primary driver that sparked the decision to pursue preference management and preference collection in the first place. If you understand which one of those drivers is the most important and let the others fall underneath that, you'll be much more successful in the overall implementation and measurement of your preference management collection. To understand some of those KPIs, we're going to identify those today, and then you can see where your organization may fit. The first KPI is preventing the loss of customers. Companies seeking to deploy effective opt-down or cross-opt strategies often do so in order to avoid what we call an atomic opt-out, which is a customer unsubscribing from all communications from a company. The atomic opt-out can be the result of a customer choice or may be caused by business rules established because the company doesn't know how to handle moving that customer from one communication channel to another. When you consider this KPI, you need to move beyond looking only at the positive side of marketing. Most marketers only consider conversion, and they don't think about the number of people that may be annoyed by the messages that are being sent out and the attrition that they're receiving because they're filling their customer's mailbox with too many communications. If you document and understand your current customer touchpoints and their associated metrics, the time that they're spending viewing the communications and also reading and reacting to those messages that they're receiving, you can start to determine what types of initiatives may be annoying your customers the most and build in the right plans to move them across to more communication types that are appropriate and maybe even change the frequency by which they receive those communications. In order to do this properly, you have to review all internally managed marketing initiatives and understand all third parties involved. Often, atomic opt-outs are not caused by the company, but rather a third party that's working on behalf of the company. Simplification and clarification of external descriptions of marketing communications is another way to make sure that you're moving people from one communication channel to the other. A customer may not view the word events in the same way that you view the word events and may need more granularity around what that communication is and what it does for them. Events to them may mean something that they attend. Events for you may be a sales event. So thinking about how that customer views that communication and then makes a decision either to choose it or to not choose it is important as you think about preventing loss of customers. The second KPI is reducing the costs. Now more than ever, marketers must justify what they're spending. And spending on marketing channels that are ineffective is a bad way to use the marketing budget. The allocation of that marketing spend must be based on the communication channels and communication preferences that the customer cares about. So moving a customer from a more expensive communication channel, for example, direct mail or receiving a letter, to one that is cheaper, for example, receiving email or a text message, may be the very thing you need to justify your spend on preference management and preference collection. Much of the marketing spend is done with third parties, so it's important that that metric exists so that you know the current customer touchpoints and determine the cost for sending communications across those different channels. Preference collection should be placed with the most expensive communication channel to encourage customers to cross-opt from one channel to the next. Justifying the investment on a preference management solution under this KPI is easily achieved through the ability to report on how many customers have moved from one channel to the next. It is also wise to use pilot programs for this KPI when measuring interest in one communication channel over another. For example, if you're considering rolling out text messages, send out a message to a subset of your overall database to understand the interest in receiving communications across that channel. The third KPI is boosting revenues. Companies that rely solely on their own internal understanding of the customer and their wants and needs often miss the mark. The best way to improve upon knowledge of the customer and to improve the analysis of the big data being collected is to simply ask your customer what communications they want to hear and across what channels. Done correctly, preference collection fine-tunes the marketing approach, and it allows you to use a surveying tool as part of the process to better understand the customers and dramatically improve your response rates as you fulfill to their desires for personalized communications. When undertaking an initiative focused on improving revenues, companies must identify locations for adding additional preference collection. For example, you can deploy a banner ad campaign based on targeting to re-engage customers who've opted out of communications with a company. They may have made a purchase and chosen not to hear from the company any longer, but you have other things that you would like to sell them or promote to them, so finding them on other sites and using a banner ad to bring them back into the fold is an effective way to use preference collection and preference management. In order to truly understand the impact of preference management and collection within an organization that wants to boost revenues, you must have existing metrics regarding abandonment, conversion, and time spent on site. These must be collected as a baseline so they can be compared over time. One campaign or message will rarely result in specific measurable boost in revenue. Understanding the complete complement of communications over time helps a company identify gaps in that relationship and improve success in pursuing that customer and bringing lifetime value to them. External messaging must be simplified, and it must take into account the customer's true drivers for interacting with that company or brand. Gaining this understanding requires a combination of surveys and primary in-person research. Ultimately, the evaluation will identify missed opportunities for content and engagement. Companies that utilize communication channels for account updates can benefit by promoting additional content that engages customers beyond that specific transaction. If you can report against this metric as part of your implementation, it will help to create consensus for new customer-centric projects, and it informs your content calendar for the creation of new content to support existing efforts. KPI number 4, centralizing preference collection and availability. The purposeful implementation of a preference management solution with centralized governance has great potential to drastically reduce overall IT complexity, as well as associated cost. Organizations that wish to centralize marketing communications find that preference collection and management is a logical first step that results in greater control and cross-organization visibility. To be truly successful with centralizing your preference collection and availability, you must baseline and understand all of your current customer touchpoints. This includes all groups that are internally managing customer communications and must include any external vendors that are acting on behalf of the company. Document existing business rules around campaigns and communications and find where the approvals exist. If you identify those gaps in the process, you have a way to put preference management and preference collection in place and start to centralize the governance. Often a company identifies issues in the frequency of communications and needs to create a consolidated content calendar across the organization. You may find that your organization is sending multiple communications to the same customer on the same day, and that's resulting in a higher opt-out rate. Centralization can be justified through a proof of concept that includes just a few business units or marketing groups that share customer lists and communication modes. From the success of this deployment, it allows you to create a roadshow of content to build internal consensus and advocate the need for governance across the rest of the organization. And the final KPI is mitigating compliance risk. Most companies that suffer from issues with compliance do so because they don't have proper processes and procedures in place to focus on compliance across the organization. They're storing customer data and customer preferences in systems that are hard to access, like Excel spreadsheets or other databases. Focus on building in compliance barriers to give your company peace of mind and allow it to approach a more progressive and potentially aggressive communication policy. Justification of the spend on this effort is easily made when taking into account possible fines, loss of time for defending claims, and protection against litigious consumers and consumer groups. A focus on preference management and preference collection doesn't end with what we call hard KPIs, which are things that are easy to track and easy to measure. You also must think about the soft KPIs. A soft KPI is something that improves the overall customer engagement that your organization has with your customers. And there are many ways of measuring customer engagement. Some companies use Forrester's Customer Experience Index. Others may be using Net Promoter Score. Whatever way you have in place to look at your overall customer experience, know that preference management and preference collection is part of that overall equation. As your marketing systems become increasingly complex, performance measurement needs to focus on the life cycle of the customer and how likely customers are willing to engage with your brand. Customer interaction metrics focus on retention rather than conversion and need to be shared across the teams and lifecycle stages. Because these metrics only gauge perception, they're more difficult to quantify and will require agreement across the organization as to the appropriate inputs to track in order to both baseline the initial state and measure the success delivered by a purposeful engagement strategy. Some examples of these softer metrics are customers' perception of your brand, the perceived customer experience, customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, customer lifetime value, and customer ROI rather than campaign ROI. Determining a way to baseline current state and then relying on an industry-accepted standard allows a company to measure progress. Does customer loyalty soften over time or even plunge with increased exposure to product support? Is the overall tone of social media mentions positive, negative, or neutral? With preference management tools in place, tracking soft KPIs becomes much easier. Customers will select useful or timely communications and opt out of ill-conceived campaigns. In short, the data will improve marketers to course correct, reduce churn, and improve marketing efficiency. Over the long term, this data will represent an actionable sample size from which to make large-scale marketing decisions. Some examples of sample success metrics include the number of opt-ins and opt-outs, the number of opt-downs, and maybe the number of customers that have managed preferences. You can also look at campaign-related metrics. How many customers took action on an opt-down page versus your preference center? What was the overall response rate? And did the customer provide a reason for opting out? Once you know more about your customers, you can start to predict the likelihood of an opt-out, and you can look at the difference between attrition and conversion for your overall marketing campaigns. The implementation of a preference management and preference collection solution allows your organization to define meaningful metrics, both things that can be tracked easily by the system and those things that can be learned by understanding your customers more deeply. Thanks for listening to our seminar today. For more information, you can visit our resource center.